Thanks for joining me, Lottie. So with Lottie O'Dea, who's from Satellite Foundation, and we're at the offices here in North Melbourne. So thanks for doing this. And we've had Rose on from Satellite before. Yeah. And for anyone who listens to this podcast will know, I think it's a fantastic organisation. It would have helped me a lot as a kid. So I think it's important to get more people from Satellite like yourself just talking about what you do and the great work you do and how people can get involved and all that sort of stuff. So your title here is Evidence and Insight Lead and Youth Advisor for Satellite Foundation. Yep. But you're also a participant in the programs as well. So maybe you want to start talking about how you got involved with Satellite in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in New Zealand, which might already be obvious from my accent. And yeah, that's where all my kind of family and lived experience of having a parent with mental illness occurred. But then about 5 years ago, I moved over to Australia. My mum was hospitalised at that time. I was feeling really kind of isolated and lonely in that experience, and I started looking around at different organisations that help people in my position. I came across some, but they were really for parents that had children with mental issues. And then I found Satellite and I was like, oh wow, these are my people. And I joined the 2019 Young Leaders Program, met some other people in my position and met Satellite and the wonderful people there. And then it was a huge surprise a year later, or maybe 6 months later, they gave me a call, they remembered me, which was a new experience for me in mental health land, and they said, hey, we've got another program going on, how about you come join us? So I did that, and then eventually started talking about what I do in my professional life, and yeah, my kind of personal and professional lives combined. And so yeah, now I get to work as youth advisor, which is really finding opportunities for our young people to speak more about what they want to see in the world, including at Satellite, so what they want Satellite to look like. And then evidence and insights, which is more around, we know what we think we're doing really great stuff with young people, but we need to be able to translate that into something that government can understand or philanthropists can understand as well. So they're two quite different roles, but I love them both. They're great. Now
let's talk about your lived experience then. So you mentioned you got a parent with mental illness, and you said something about being forgotten about as or not, which I think a lot of people can relate to. So maybe you want to talk about your experience with mental illness itself, and maybe go into more about your experiences about being forgotten or why you feel that way.
Yeah, so my mum has a delusional disorder, which from my level of understanding of different mental health diagnoses is fairly similar to schizophrenia, but she doesn't have hallucinations around noise or kind of visuals. But she does definitely experience delusions and just psychotic episodes and just really distress. So she's had that probably long before I was born. She was not diagnosed. My mum, I have an older mum, she was born in the 1940s, and so I was a little surprise in her 40s. And yeah, but so she was about 46 when she had me, wasn't in a great relationship with my dad, which just kind of exacerbated all these things that had probably been under the surface for a very long time. And around the time I was 8, she had her first cycle of being put into hospital, going through that, coming out, being under in New Zealand what called the Compulsory Treatment Act. I think there's similar concepts here in Australia, and really, just was under that, and then doctors kind of got sick of this person just turning up and said, oh look, she's probably fine, she's a very articulate person, she puts kind of her clothes together well, and I think people saw that and said a person with mental issues can't look like that, so she's probably fine. And so they would take her off the Compulsory Treatment Act, and then the kind of what we came to realise was a cycle began again of her deciding that she's not sick, she doesn't need the medication, a few months later, the delusions begin again in small ways, build up to really big ways, become a harm to herself or to other people, and particularly me as a child in that situation. And yeah, cycle starting again.
I can relate to everything you said because it's very similar to mine.
Yeah.
And yeah, one thing you said, which I think most people might not be, yeah, my mum was the same, presented really well, had really nice clothes and looked like she had it all together and stuff like that. But yeah, almost as a way to hide it.
Yeah.
But so you said you're around 8 when you sort of first started realising, or you can sort of remember what was going on. So what were you thinking, around that sort of time, or do you remember sort of the feelings of what was happening, or how did it change your perspective, I guess?
Well, I mean, I think the thing that I felt, and I feel like other people with similar experiences feel, you don't really realise that it's not normal for a while. And so things like my mother thinking she's being followed all the time. So my role in the car would be to write down the number plates of all the cars that were following us. And then kind of, going in a car ride with some friends and kind of wondering why they don't have to note down the number plates of the other cars, or my mum talking to me about quite intense things relating to like sex or pregnancy at quite a young age, because she thought I could be pregnant to this man that she had delusions about and was jealous of all women, including her own daughter, about, and just kind of, I guess, having those experiences, assuming that they're what you should be doing because it's your mum and you love and trust her and that's what she's there for, and then kind of observing other families where that didn't quite happen, and kind of slowly connecting the dots, and then a big event like a hospitalisation occurred, where I do have older brothers and sisters, but they're much older than me, so decades kind of age difference, where they would then try to broach the subject with me. But I think it was hard because I felt really protective of my mum. It was just me, my mum and my dog, and we were this little triad that were fiercely protective of one another. And so even against my own siblings, I was like, I don't want you to take my mum away from me, even though she's doing these things that really scare me.
No, I think it's people watching this with a similar experience, it's a very common thing what you just said then. So yeah, that perspective thing's hard because as you said, that's your normal, right? Your normal is this, and you love your mum or your dad, and you don't know any different. But as you said, you start piecing it together when you might go to a friend's house or something, and you just you start working out, well, maybe my situation's not as normal. So how did you deal with that growing up in regards to how you framed it to yourself, or was it just something where you loved your mum so much you just didn't really worry about it, or how did you deal with that?
I think in part I was a little bit scared of the alternative as well. So my mum separated from my dad. I was really nervous about being removed from my mum's custody and going into my dad's custody. I did not want that. And so I was afraid, that wanting to love and protect my mum, but I was also afraid if someone kind of finds out what's going on, I'm going to be taken away from my mum, and that's scary for me. But I guess I sort of appointed myself as the role of, I know my mum best, I know what she needs, from a really young age, and I was worried if I was taken away from her, she would also get worse. Yeah.
How did you deal with the hospitalisation offer? Because were you taken in to see her, or how did that? What was the process like in New Zealand?
Yeah. So I mean, I guess my brothers and sisters were doing all that kind of behind the scenes work that, as I've gotten older, I kind of understand what they would have been doing, in terms of getting her signed up as an involuntary patient, because my mum will always be an involuntary patient. But I didn't really find out about it until kind of the last minute, or that's my recollection of it anyway. And they did take me in to see mum. I do remember my brother at one point asking me if I could pack a bag for my mum, and I remember just walking into her wardrobe and then just being like, no, I can't do this. It was just way too much for me to do. and it really just really made me feel sad and feel like I was in a position it felt like no one else at my age was in, and I just felt extremely alone in that moment, despite the support of my siblings. And yeah, I have a really distinct memory of being in the psych ward in Wellington, in New Zealand, and just everything just being stark white, and seeing like a room. It was kind of glass, and it had like some frosting, so you could only see like partly into it. And I could see my mum on the other side of the room, kind of keeping like all together, sitting up, putting a face on, but also looking just terrified in her eyes. And then I remember seeing the person sitting across from her, who was just this bald man I just remember the light hitting his head, and just, I don't know, it just seemed really strange seeing my mum in this incredibly sterile environment where, I guess in my mind at that age, was where bad people go. And so that just really sticks with me, seeing someone that I love so much and was such a comfort to me being sent to this sterile environment, and scary looking environment.
Now, did anyone explain much to you when that first time happened? Because I remember it as well. It's a very scary experience, as you said, and you just don't understand that these places exist. Now, did you meet the psychologist there, or was there anyone there, like a nurse, the mental health nurse, to explain things to you, or were you provided any, let's say, context or any sort of caring guidance in any way?
Not that I remember. I'm confident my siblings would have probably been in that role. And as I got older, I was definitely never really older but still under the age of 18. I was never given that respect, basically, by the mental health professionals. I think they saw not telling me information as protecting me, but really it just completely disempowered me, because I was essentially on the front lines. I was her full-time carer. I was the one constantly looking out for, if someone looked at her in a weird way, I was the one on the lookout to calm her down, cheer her up, so she didn't develop a delusion out of that situation. And so being kept in the dark by the mental health profession just amplified how lonely I felt, and the fact that I was just making everything up as I was going. I had no idea what was really going on.
I completely relate to what you said then. I think, the key phrase is lack of respect. And, I sort of think, I don't think they're trying to protect us. I just think they just don't want, me personally, I just think they don't want I've got enough to deal with. I've got children, hard work, or, whatever. But what you said is the key is we're the front line, whereas you're in the home with your mother, you're the emotional support, and you're the carer. And you know that person better, regardless of whether you're 8 years old, 6 years old, or 25 years old. You know that person better, and you're right. You need to be treated with respect, because you will be more mature, and you will have understanding of a far more intense concept than other kids your age. And I think even now, I don't know what your opinion on it now is. Could be you deal with a lot of kids now, so probably you're better than me. But I don't know how much it has changed. But do you think it is productive, or what would you advise if there is a parent in a mental health psychiatric ward? How should you involve the children, or what would you think would be the most appropriate way to do it?
I actually think just treating the child as the expert in the situation, and not seeing them as someone that needs to be informed of something. I think treating them as, so what do you think's going on? What do you think makes mum or dad or whoever feel this way? And kind of just treating that child as a peer, because in that situation they have the depth of knowledge of that person or of their illness. Maybe they don't have the right medical jargon, but I feel like all these kids with all these like mental health nurses that don't have the qualification, but we've got this depth of emotional experience, and instead of telling them something, ask them. And I feel like that's useful not just for making the child feel safe, but it's actually a huge information source for the mental health professionals as well, in terms of, you know, understanding even just basic concepts. Things like financial instability is a huge trigger for my mum's episodes, many children's like situations. And in many of these situations, the kids end up becoming not just the carer, but also the accountant of the household as well. So I think the professionals understanding that perspective is also really helpful and empowers the young person and makes them feel safe, so that if you did want to inform them of something, so like a diagnosis or give them knowledge, then you've built a kind of trust with that young person to do that. But I completely take your point. Having that and investing in that kind of conversation takes time, and sometimes those professionals don't have it or don't want to invest it.
And I was going to say, from dealing with a lot of young people you do now, what do you hear from them in regards to how they're being treated? Is there a lack of respect still, or they're being involved more? What are you sort of hearing?
I think in a clinical setting, there's certainly still experiencing the same level of disrespect. I haven't heard really examples of how that's changed. I guess at a societal kind of level, I feel like there's a bit of a chipping away at some of that. So phrases like, I guess, carer in relation to mental illness, that was not a conversation that was happening in New Zealand, at least up until the time I left about 5 years ago, whereas I feel like it is here. And if you say the phrase young carer, maybe people don't fully understand the wide breadth that could cover, but there's some foundational level of understanding that could be. So I feel like there's probably more respect coming from society to these young people than there is from in a medical or clinical setting to these young people, but I don't think either is enough.
Yeah, I agree. I think the clinical setting, it's annoying to hear that, because like you just think, you know, this is not a common, even though it's not everyone, but there would be a common issue, right? And you'd think, as you said, what would have helped you is just being acknowledged and just being spoken to the same as what they might have been speaking to your siblings, if they were just to be in the room and just to be spoken to as the same, regardless if you're 8 years old or you're listening or not, because that memory will at least stick with you. When you get a bit older, you think, oh, they actually care and they've treated me with a bit of respect and I understand a bit more. Whereas even to now, you're saying I felt a lack of respect, right? That sticks with you, doesn't it?
Oh, definitely.
You know, exactly the same thing with me. And that's why, for me personally, it puts you off, you know, the mental health profession or psychologist or psychiatrist in general. I've got a really bad disdain to them just because of that way I was treated in my younger years. Whereas you've gone the other way, where you've gone and worked in that field. Whereas,
I mean, kind of.
We're involved in that. You're involved, not in clinical, but I mean in the mental health profession in some way. But I think there'd be a lot of people who have had our experiences who would be completely put off. Yeah. And they might not get the help they need to deal with PTSD or to deal with all these sorts of things because of that one bad experience, or just from that lack of come in the room and just talk to, you know. And I think it's a 5-minute, 10-minute thing. Yeah. But the impact could be huge.
Yeah, I agree. And in fact, I think it's probably led to me being quite, you know, in mental health land, but in a non-clinical way. Like I think I probably wouldn't be able to be a doctor anyway, but I think, that kind of experience has put me off those kinds of things, or that kind of career path anyway. So I guess I see Satellite as really the antidote to that kind of treatment though, because we're a place where kids or young people and young adults as well can come in and they can kind of set the agenda, including just things like what activities you want to do, or we have a lot of creative stuff, and whenever we have creative work, they can take that where they want to take it. And that to me is kind of, just the antidote to that opposite approach of you will do this or we just won't even talk to you. And it's quite amazing to see in Satellite environments, because you don't even need to talk about mental health a lot of the time, or you don't need to talk about diagnosis or what's going on at home. You can just let them be, and that is actually sadly groundbreaking for a lot of young people.
Yeah, because everyone there's got an understanding, like everyone's there for the similar reason.
Yeah.
And they know that. And as you said, when you were younger, you felt so isolated. Whereas if you had something like this when you were younger, just that isolation immediately goes. And you don't feel lonely, and you go, right, cool. There is.
Yeah.
It's not just me as an isolated issue. There is a whole bunch of other people going for the same thing, and you feel instantly a bit better about yourself, better self-esteem, and all that sort of stuff. So with let's talk about Satellite for this section in regards to the programs. What age? How do actually people get identified as well? And what are you finding out with the programs and how it's helping people?
Yeah, so Satellite covers a really wide range of ages, which I think is fantastic. So we go all the way kind of down to that sort of 8-year-old stage, and then all the way up to 25, but also over 25. Like when I first started as a participant at Satellite, I think I was 27, and their sort of attitude is all the kind of services or the funding related to services can be really cut and dry about certain age ranges for supports, but that's not how mental illness works. It doesn't go, oh, you're 25, okay, cool, all your issues, challenges are solved. Right. Yeah. So we are really open for people on kind of either end of that spectrum to be part of our programs. We then kind of section up age ranges between that. So kind of roughly sort of the 8 to 12s, then the kind of 13s to 17s, and then the 18s to 25 pluses. That's kind of typically how programs are grouped up. And I can't remember the second part of your question.
But I think that's important because 8's important because you sort of know you've maybe started, you've half got an idea what's maybe starting to go on. But as you said, up to 25 or even beyond that, whereas people might be so put off by their experiences at a young age, they might not seek out anyone until, let's say, 27 or 25, right? Me probably was 30, 31 because I've had such a bad experience as a young person, whereas you're right, I think that open age, it's not just a cut-off point where you're all sorted, it's a lifelong thing, unfortunately, where you're going to have to keep dealing with things. But the other thing I was going to ask you about was the identification process. So is there something where the school, or how do these kids get nominated into it? Or do many parents even nominate these people into the program? Yeah,
so in short, it's a big mix. We get referrals through the families with parents with mental illness, which is shortened to FAPME. We get referrals through that process, referrals through programs like McKillop Family Services. But we do get parents referring in their kids, which, to be honest, just warms my heart so much that there are parents out there going, I have this thing, or my partner has this thing, or my ex-partner, whatever. That's not something to be shameful or guilty about, but it is something that means maybe my kid needs a bit of additional support, or just an opportunity to have fun with other young kids that are in a similar situation. And so we do receive parental referrals, and they're really open about it, and I've had the opportunity to speak to some of the parents, and it's just incredible talking with them. And as a person that didn't have something like Satellite in their lives, it just warms your heart being like, wow, there are parents like that out in the world that are incredibly brave and courageous to do that. It's just wonderful.
What about schools? Do you match from schools? Because I think with schools being the teachers, they would know a bit about the kid's situation as well. And for me, I sort of think it is, if the teachers could have awareness around this is the thing in Victoria or whatever, it makes it easier for them to refer us. But I don't think they've had a lot of options. I knew growing before, you would have known as well that the schools wouldn't have had any idea of what to do. Or
no, in fact, I distinctly remember a teacher, because my mum was having a lot of issues, I pulled a lot of sickies at school to be at home with my mum. But obviously that had an impact on her able to earn an income. She's a single mum. And I distinctly remember a teacher pulling me into a cupboard and just yelling at me saying that I was like faking being sick and all this stuff, and that was making it worse for my mum. And yeah, so when you say they're not particularly informed about what's going on, that kind of episode really hits home to me, that not only were they just simply not there to provide appropriate support, in fact they went the other way and really did not assist me at all. But I think in short, like, no, we don't receive that many referrals through schools. We want them, and we're working on getting more. So in a couple of different ways. So one is that Satellite's getting more into delivering programs in schools and working alongside schools to figure out what would actually be helpful. So we've tried things like targeted programs where young people that have parents or family members with mental illness are sort of recommended to Satellite to create a program. But now we're also working on programs that are wider, so kind of imagine like your class assembly or home class sort of approach, where everyone gets that kind of education, because there's lots of things with the cohort that we talk about that are also just relevant for other people. Like caring is not something that has to only happen when someone has a mental illness. There's plenty of transferable skills and just being a good person from those kinds of programs. So we're doing that kind of thing. But then because of the Royal Commission into Mental Health Services in Victoria, there's also other opportunities as well. So like the Victorian government's invested more into like mental health supports within schools, primary and secondary, which is really exciting. And they've also got things like the mental health menu, where they're giving funding to schools to choose off a menu of supports related to mental health and wellbeing. And there's a procurement process related to that, but we're wanting to get on that menu with some of our programs. So we're working in a few different ways to get into schools more. But yeah, it's going to be a little bit of give and take to some extent. There's only so much we can do until there is awareness, that mental health is important, and that that mental health belongs in schools, and C, that it's not just when a young person themselves has a mental illness or faces a mental health challenge, but that if other people in their lives have that going on, that young person deserves support and can access it. We exist.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about the school part, because I think it's important, because there's a lot of kids who will go to school and have all this stuff going on at home and then act normal at school, which you obviously know. So what do you think would have helped you from a school's perspective? Or because there's a fine line, like you don't want to use it as a kid, you could use it like as an excuse to have bad behaviour and you get away with things, and then all of a sudden it's not a good behaviour to have, but also you do need some sort of understanding or some sort of help to try and acknowledge that that's going on, rather than just trying to treat you the same as everyone else. So what do you think would have helped you from a school perspective?
Well, I actually did have a really great experience at my school. A couple of reasons why it might have been a really good experience, and this is back in New Zealand, is that it was like a private school. It was a boarding school as well, which gave me a bit of distance from my family, which I have to say was life-changing, and having that essentially respite from my mum during some of those years. And that was something that was spearheaded by my brothers and sisters as well. But I was a very, very, very academic student at my school, and I was very tough on myself and wildly overcommitted to a million different things. And then at some point I was doing that, and mum was not in hospital but on the way there, basically, which I think is the hardest time. Once they're in hospital, it becomes a bit easier, to be honest. It's the few months before it. And it was just getting way, way too much. And I can't remember why, but at some point me and a group of friends ended up in the staff room, and I saw that they had a whiteboard, and on it they had things saying like so-and-so's parents are separating, or give so-and-so a bit more space to or slack in the classroom, kind of thing. And I was like, oh wow, there's a way to communicate to my teachers that I've got other stuff going on, And so I approached someone about what was going on for me, because it had always been very much on shutdown. I didn't want really anyone to know, apart from my friends. And they put it on this whiteboard, and I had a couple of different responses from staff. One was my English teacher. He came up to me, I think it must have been like the day after it was kind of put up on the board, and he said, hey, we don't have to have like a big conversation about this or anything, but I just wanted you to know, like, my dad suffered from alcoholism and it was a big deal, but it hasn't like determined the kind of person that I would be. And then he kind of just like let me be, like we didn't have to have a big heart to heart or anything, but he's like, I just wanted you to know that. And I thought that was just really nice. And then the second incident was my principal came up to me and she said, wow, this is very serious. Shouldn't we be letting your father know? And then my heart kind of just dropped to the floor because I was terrified, because I've been keeping this completely quiet from not just my dad, but my whole dad's side of my family, that if my dad found out, he would get custody of me, he would stop, like take me out of my school, and I knew that my education in the school I was at was very good for me and my life. And so I just instantly terrified, like, what have I done? Why have I shared this? I've screwed everything up. And then I kind of said to her, oh no, I really would like you not to, please. That would be very bad for my situation. And she trusted me and she said, okay, I trust what you say. I'll follow your guidance on this. So it was a real moment of, oh my God, this could go so wrong for me and my family, to then an incredible moment where an adult was trusting me as a technical child. But yeah, she respected me, which was a complete difference to the experiences that I was just talking about before. So it was a very emotional roller coaster for me in those few seconds.
No, it's great to hear that from a school's perspective.
Yeah.
I don't think it'd be overly common, but it's really good to hear that your school was like that.
Yeah.
Because as you said, you remember it now and it sticks with you and all that sort of stuff.
Absolutely.
It's absolutely fantastic. So what I was going to say to you now is you stayed on a really good path. Obviously, you studied hard. Where did you get that? Because you can go the two ways, I reckon. You can either use it as an excuse to go and I'm going to be bad or whatever, I'm going to do this and that and blame this. Whereas you've gone the other way, where you've gone and worked really hard, studied and all that sort of stuff. So was it a conscious decision you made, or was it just naturally, or how did you come across that?
I think it was definitely influenced by my mum's drive to education. She had a pretty traumatic childhood as well. And she saw education as her way out, and noting that she's a teenage girl in the 1950s kind of thing when we're talking about this, so this is quite substantial. And she, for all of my siblings and I, really pushed hard on education, and so part of it definitely came from that. But I guess as well as once I got into a very fancy school with incredible other students and teachers around me, it kind of really dawned on me, wow, this is the key to unlock lots of other things as well. And I think sometimes, you can say people not use it as an excuse, but it can get too much and get in the way of pursuing other things. If anything, I think I swung too hard in the other direction and kind of clung to education and being like a perfect A+ student kind of person, that I neglected the other parts of my life. So it was just pull it together, be a trooper, get good grades, get out of here. Whereas I wish I had taken the time to be like, how am I going? How's my mental health? How's my emotional health? Am I a stable human being? Which I only kind of really came to do in university, and as a 18+-year-old, because I could make decisions relating to my own mental health that wouldn't be undermined or cancelled by my mum.
And what strategies did you use growing up to help you? Was it something where you were involved? Obviously, education was important, so you would study a lot, which would probably take your mind of a lot of things. But because it's a very stressful environment, it can be sometimes, and especially as you said before, the period when you know they're really sick or they're about to get unwell and made involuntary, but you can't do anything about it. So how did you deal with that time? And what do you think about that period between that unwell period? So I've heard a few opinions on it, and like, you know, people go, well, the person, you know, under the act, they can't get that. If someone doesn't want help, they can't really get forced to get help or whatever. But saying that, you've still got kids involved or who they're responsible for. So where does the priority lie? Does the priority lie with the person with the illness or the kids who are in their care? So what's the balance between it? So maybe do you want to talk a little bit about what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that problem, I think, is really a system-created problem. When you're in a family where someone has a mental illness and they don't acknowledge it, or in my mum's case, it is part of her illness. She has anosognosia, I think is the right word for it, where she is incapable of having insight into her own mental illness.
I was exactly the same, yeah.
And so many in the kind of schizophrenia sort of world are. But the system's not built for it because, you know, the wide range of mental illnesses, kind of schizophrenia, or particularly those more complex ones, they make up a minority. But I think the impact that those illnesses and challenges bring about, yes, they're in the minority, but the depth of impact and the impact on people around them is so huge. But I think because the system is built, ironically, with the assumption that people are working rationally, but applying that to a mental health system, I think, is just bizarre. But they assume that if someone is unwell, A, they'll recognise they're unwell, B, they'll recognise they need support, and C, they'll figure out a way to go get it. And I just think that the fundamental idea behind that's wrong for a lot of people, and then you add in something like lack of insight. And then for the family, there's two options. One is just to watch the person crash and burn. Two is to make them an involuntary patient, or put them under something like the compulsory treatment order. And we don't want to do that. Like, there's, you know, you are sacrificing someone's human rights to do that, and it is extremely serious, but it's literally the only tool in our toolbox. And so I think when you ask that question, like, where should the priority be, I think it needs to be on both, but I think at the moment, because the only tool in our toolbox is this one extreme measure, that's all we can use, and it's actually really hard to get access to it, which makes sense because it's so serious, but there's nothing else for us to use. Yeah,
you're right. And the reason why I asked that question is I posted something, I think it was someone who maybe had bipolar or schizophrenia, had a crack back at me saying, well, it's not up to, you know, there's all these laws, and I'm sort of thinking, well, you know, when there's a child or when there's young people involved and they're responsible for a primary caregiver, is then it's got to sort of shift a bit. And the annoying thing is that we know that person better than anyone else. And growing up, my situation is we knew my mum was getting unwell. Call me uncle. Oh, you just got to let her get sick, Joel, until she gets the cops or the ambulance. Like, it shouldn't be like that. You know, you got a 4-week, 3-week period where it's highly risky. Like, why can't we call the caseworker or someone to come around and check on her? And then you're right, because you're right. They don't have insight into themselves, and a lot of the time they don't think they've got a mental illness, or they don't have nothing wrong with them. And that's not having a crack at people at all with that. But that's just the reality of it. And you're right. It's a system construct. What you just said then. That those things are in place, and then that sort of, it just really, there's a dangerous period which is created for young people and for the person as well with the illness, and there's like, it's almost, there's nothing can be done. And the reality, if someone's watching this or listening in regards to how it works, is the person gets so unwell generally where either the police are called or there's the ambulance is called, and then they're taken to the emergency room, you know, with everyone else in there. We've got broken arms or whatever else, and then they've got to do a mental health assessment, even though they've got extensive history, and then if there's a bed available or not, then they've got to then take them to the, it's a process is wrong.
Oh, it's completely wrong. And I guess I'm excited to see in the Royal Commission, like, that they're, wanting to change those things, but the cynic in me is kind of waiting for, particularly in the complex mental health space, for it to kind of revert to the norm. I'm not holding my breath for there to be more tools made available for people or families in that situation. But I'm really excited to be proven wrong, but I'm cautiously optimistic about those developments.
Well, the only thing for us is, 3 to 4 weeks out or whatever the time frame was, this person's they're about to go over the edge, and you had no recourse, and you're just told, you've just got to do it. Then you've got to deal with that. So if you're doing exams, or you're trying to do something, or you can't get to your practice or whatever because you can't drive at that age or whatever, and it's just like, you want the help but you can't get it.
Yeah.
And that's the reality of it. And you're right, hopefully something changes, but that's just Victoria alone. It's not the rest of Australia. And I don't know, what would you think would help in that situation? So that 3 to 4 week period, what would you think? So let's say a young person or a kid or whoever, what could they do to help, or what should be the scenario?
I think in that environment, that is really where the caseworker or the kind of the social worker really can come into their own, because they are the people that have kind of the skills, the connections to services, to do things like not necessarily always doing a formal psych assessment, but they know the things that they need to be looking for. But that is when I feel like we should be able to call on the professional services to come in. And maybe they're still not at the kind of hospitalisation stage, but we want to avoid the hospitalisation stage. And I feel like there's things that people in those roles can help with. So even if it's things that aren't directly around the mental illness, like financial stability, like, travel for the kids to school, things that can just lessen some of the other pressures that then kick off the mental illness as well. I think even doing things like that can massively help the person going through the distress, but definitely the family as well. And then I think there just needs to be access to treatment and services that are for people in that stage of their mental illness. Because like I say, we don't want them to get to the hospital stage. That's awful. But it's just, it's watching a slow car crash at the moment, and without that tool or those kind of connections in place.
Some great points there, and hopefully something's changed about it. Now, what I want to talk about now is, I think there's a lot less stigma with depression and anxiety. However, with bipolar and schizophrenia and delusional, and these are still words that charities or people don't like using, or I don't think understand. There's mental health, and people think they understand everything in mental health, but as we know, there's a lot more towards that. So what more do you think can be done for young people or in the community to destigmatise those conditions? Because we know from, I think it was Bipolar Australia report, that 40%, I think it was 43% of people who committed suicide in 2018, 2019 had bipolar disorder, for example, and then schizophrenia was like another 10%. So you got more than half of the, unfortunately, people who choose to end their life in Australia every year have two conditions.
Yeah.
Yet I don't think we know that. So what more do you think, what should be done to help destigmatise those two conditions and your mother's conditions? What could be done? What do you think?
For me, what I would love to see is, for example, the young people at Satellite just being everywhere, like them sharing their stories, them being invited to share their stories, because that's the best way to understand what those illnesses look like in practice, is to talk with young people, to hear, it's really tough, but also this is still my mum at the end of the day, and I love her, and there's a million great things about her. And I think it's really easy for us to point at someone and be like, oh, they're a schizophrenic, and that equals bad mother. Whereas that's not the case. And I think also I would love to see more conversations where there's people that have gone through or are still on their journey with their own mental health challenges, and be talking with people that are in the families of those with mental health challenges, because I feel like sometimes the consumer and the carer conversations happen in parallel, and it's kind of like we're never allowed to meet because God forbid we disagree with one another. But I think it's really important that we disagree with one another, especially when it comes to things like involuntary treatment. We should be, having a debate about it. And you can't kind of come to understand a lot of those tricky and complex concepts or feelings until you hear them from people. So I think it's really, you can't really get past just that awareness raising that, those old shirts that were like, this is what a feminist looks like. It's kind of like, this is what a young person that has a parent with bipolar looks like. And there's a huge range. And I think just we have to get over that hump before we can kind of get anywhere else.
Now with the programs in Satellite, you use a lot of creative outlets.
Yeah.
So do you want me to talk more about why you do the programs a certain way you do them, or why do you find that helps?
Well, it's funny that you say that, because I remember kind of looking at Satellite when I was thinking about joining as a participant, and then also in the program that I started in, and looking at all this creative stuff and me going, I'm not a creative person, I'm like your numbers girl, I don't want to like hold hands and create an interpretive dance about mental illness. That strikes fear in my heart.
I'll be thinking the same thing, I'm thinking exactly the same.
And so I was pretty skeptical coming in, but I was like, whatever, I'll give it a shot. How bad could this go? And really, I think the magic of the creative work is that it means, you don't have to talk about mental health directly, which particularly in the younger age groups, it's just not appropriate to. Like, they've already been in lots of deep and meaningful and very serious conversations about this. We don't need to approach it from that view, and in fact, it's not really helpful. But the creative activities that we do, they can be about mental health, but in terms of, what am I good at? What superhero would I be if I was a superhero? And recognizing their strengths and building their own mental resilience, but not necessarily in sitting them down and being like, okay, so can you give me a list of your top 5 strengths and weaknesses? And then, show it, I guess, helping them to identify what's going well for them and their own mental well-being, but also helping them to identify like other things that are going on in their lives as well. As well as the fact that when you're doing something creative, you're kind of doing it like shoulder to shoulder with another person, and because of Satellite, it will always be another younger person that has at least one thing in common with you, and we see sort of, it's really that peer connection that opens people up to those bigger and sometimes heavier conversations as well. But creativity is kind of that gateway to letting those conversations happen. So I'm a convert, and now as a facilitator, I'm actually leading some of the creative activities. So I've come from like my skeptical scaredness of being a non-creative to kind of recognizing there's a real reason why it works and makes people feel comfortable. It gives them various outlets to communicate whatever they want to communicate. And it also just lets people try new things. And I think when you've been through kind of traumatic time or just a long-standing challenge, sometimes you just move into that trooper mode where you're like, I just need to get this done, I need to get mum well, I need to look after mum. The freedom and the privilege of trying new things is not always something that's there. And so this kind of space exists to help with that, and that helps you feel good as a person. You're kind of filling your own cup.
I can imagine. I was going to say, because you're involved with the evidence side of this, do you want to maybe talk about some maybe numbers then, or what's some data that that people might not be aware about who are watching this regarding children who have a parent with a mental illness, and outcomes and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've got numbers about the problem in terms of, we know that 25% of people experience some level of mental health challenge, and many of those people will be parents. So there's a huge amount of children out there that are in this situation. What we don't have as many numbers on or evidence on is what the kind of outcomes are for young people when they do something like Satellite. And so that's a gap that we've got at the moment, but it's also something that we're wanting to fill. So that's why I have the role that I have, and supporting Satellite to measure its impact and to communicate its impact. And we do things like we bring on universities such as Monash to support us in our evaluation of our activities, how we can get better. And that sort of evaluation is actually directed by like our youth advisory council as well. So when we measure our impact, we want it to be useful for talking with government, but we don't want it to be kind of fully driven by that outcome. We bring in our young people to tell us, this is what was meaningful to me, say peer connection, realising I'm not all alone. And we go, great, that you're the expert in this situation. Then we get researchers and so on to figure out useful ways to measure things like social connection.
Yeah, because I was going to say, because it's almost hard, because you've almost got to measure someone from, I don't know how you do it, but like 8 years old, right? You've got an 8 years old person in Satellite, and you have an 8-year person who's got any connection with any organisation. You've almost got to track their life, like what was the level of education, are they working, youth, did they have youth services, whatever it was, right? So what are the indicators, or what do you actually measure along the journey?
Yeah, so we actually don't have that sort of longitudinal view.
Well, it'd be hard because it's like 10 years, it's a long time, and unfortunately, with governments, I presume you've got to show stuff quick, unfortunately, for funding. And
yeah, sometimes. I mean, there's been really amazing work, like in the justice space, in relation to that kind of concept you're talking about. Imagine kind of one person, two people in the same person in parallel universes. And they are doing that kind of work in justice, for example. So if one, let's say a young person does a burglary, and one gets rehabilitative justice and one gets kind of the typical juvie sort of approach, how does that sort of change their life pathways? But I think partly it's easier to do that in justice in a way, because there's fairly easy kind of outcomes or bad outcomes to avoid to look for. Whereas in our space, mental health still has that stigma around it. Not that justice doesn't, but I guess we're competing against the fact that, for example, as an under 18-year-old, I never would have been identified as a person that could go to Satellite because my mum would immediately take that away. But also that we rely quite strongly on the kind of clinical outcomes at the moment to understand the experiences that young people have with this kind of experience. So you'll hear phrases like young people that have parents or carers with mental illness are twice as likely to have their own mental health challenges. And we agree that that's a really important thing, but for us it's also like that is true, but they are also fiercely resilient people, and we would much rather kind of get a sense of, how does that experience as a child in that situation or a young person make you resilient, prepare you for other kind of challenges that will come along in your life, and then how does something like Satellite build on that resilience? How does it build a sense of community with other people? Which I guess in short is having a more strengths-based approach to it. The hard part about that is it's harder to measure, and it's newer. It's easier to measure when someone's had a hospitalisation and the cost of hospitalisation. It's harder to measure the the change in resilience for a person, and also the kind of monetized benefit of a change in someone's resilience.
I remember chatting to Addie, who was another person involved with satellite, and same thing. It was just I was trying to work out, like, we know logically, like, all right, this is a positive thing, right? And like, you know, I understand you have to show stuff for governments and stuff, but they throw money at anything now these days without much stuff. But it's annoying because we know how much it would have helped, and we know the impact of, you know firsthand the impact it has. But just trying to demonstrate that as a study or with numbers or however you need to do it is very frustrating, because you can almost just have the stories of the kids or the young people who've done it who just talk about it there, like in front of a room of politicians or whoever was doing the funding. And for me personally, that's the evidence you sort of need. But it's just really hard, because I can understand from your point of view how hard it must be to try and put that on paper. Yeah. And how do you actually do that? Whereas everyone probably logically knows that it's doing all this stuff, whereas to see that for the bureaucrats or for the people doing the funding or whatever, it just seems like it's a very tough challenge that you've got to do.
It is. I guess I've seen the other side of it though, because I've worked within government and trained as an economist as well. So I guess I've seen their perspective in terms of, you've got research and development into child cancer. You've got programs like Satellite, but you've also got things like social housing, and all of those things can be preventative policy, and they're all kind of competing against one another. So one of the things we're doing to try stand out in that argument, in that environment, is to do what's called a social return on investment. And basically that's, what is the benefit that wider society kind of gets from something like Satellite existing, compared to the cost of that to the funder. And I guess, some people get really nervous when things get boiled down to dollar values. Again, my training makes me very nonchalant about that. I'm totally fine with that. But I'm fine with it because I guess I know how it's used. Like, it's not about the individual sort of dollars and cents. It's more about demonstrating, hey, if you do help a young person in this situation, you're helping them in that moment. You're helping them, for the rest of their lives. So you help with their resilience. That's good in the very immediate short term for getting through what they need to get through, but can also help with the other challenges that come up in their lives. And now actually Satellite's at a point where some of the earliest people that went through their programs, they're kind of on that either in or at the cusp of sort of parenthood themselves, some of them. And so I think now is when we'll start to see some of that, generational change as well, like where we can help break the cycle.
Yeah, and I think that's important because, as a cost for an economy, like if, to have someone who can be a better parent than maybe what they were, just makes everything better, as you know. It just makes, as you said, breaks the cycle. Yeah. And it makes life a lot easier for a lot of people. But it must have made you guys feel really good to be specifically mentioned in the Mental Health Royal Commission report in Victoria, and to get that funding as well, which is fantastic for an organisation. Obviously, Rose has put years into it, with not much, financial help, but to have that acknowledgement as well, I think first off. So, what do you hope to do with that funding, or how are you going to use that, or what's the plan?
I mean, firstly, it was incredible. I also think it's just amazing the fact that someone like Rose could see this a literal decade in advance of what feels like everyone else. She saw that this was an issue, she saw that more support was needed, and she made it happen.
I think it's amazing. Yeah, I think it's amazing. I said this before. I think, for someone to be so passionate about this, where they're just passionate about that issue, and to put all that 10 years of work into something with no expectation of any return, but to know that you're actually doing something, whereas a lot of people say that and whatever, whereas she's gone and done it, and now to get that reward at the
exactly.
10 years to
and
help.
it doesn't always happen. There's lots of people out there that do amazing things and don't get that recognition or funding. So it's incredible to be in that position where both of those things have occurred. And then in terms of going forward, it's really exciting times where in short, expanding the programs that we have. So not just kind of doing more of what we've done before, but we're doing new things as well. So we've always done like a couple of regional workshops, because being out in the regions is extremely important to Satellite. We know that kind of the quality and consistency of services can really drop off when you leave sort of metropolitan areas. Yeah. And so now we're doing things like planning like a regional roadshow where we can sort of consistently make our way around particular areas of Victoria to begin with, but we've got a plan for world domination. And then we're also broadening the kind of things that we can offer as well. So for that sort of 18 to 25, we've always had this thing we call youth pathways, which is, you can come in to Satellite sometimes to engage with things in relation to your situation in relation to mental health. But through youth pathways, you can also come in to give back in some way or to upskill in other ways. So we have things like in relation to things like public speaking, in relation to thinking about your career, including things, in fact, you came to one of our workshops in relation to careers or thinking about how you might want to draw on your lived experience in what you do and the different shapes that can take. And so we've had that in some shape or form, but now what we're doing is, broadening that to a younger age group as well, with fun activities that are, really flexible, and we make them work for the people that come across Satellite. And then we've also introduced our Youth Advisory Council as well. So they started at the beginning of this year, and we're still kind of in that setup phase, but as we get further along, they'll be giving us advice on all sorts of things, from things like how can we make our website really speak to the people we want it to speak to things like finding opportunities for them to share their story or advocate for what they think should happen in the system, to linking them to opportunities to be trained in like peer work, for example. So it's a really exciting time for us to do more, but also for us to link to the other developments that are happening in the mental health sector, but also into other sectors like the creative sector as well, and just create those linkages for our young people, and then just watch them grab it with both hands and move forward. It's awesome.
Awesome. So what we'll do is, we've probably gone for more than an hour. I know we've got no, that's good. It's good. But we might get kicked out of the room. But where can people find out more about Satellite, or what do they do?
Yeah, so there's probably two good places to go. One is just to Google Satellite Foundation, and you'll come across our website, and we're also pretty active on Facebook and on Instagram as well. And on that you can kind of get a sense of who we are, what we do, and really if you've still got questions, whether you're a parent, a carer, a young person, or maybe a professional working in this kind of space, the best thing to do is really flick us an email, get on the phone with us. We're still, we're growing, we've got plans for world domination, but we've still got that kind of heart of a small organisation, and we're really good at making, programs flexible to what people need. So the best way for us to do that is to let us know what's on your mind. Learn a bit more about us, we'll learn a bit more about you, and then we can really do some cool stuff together. Sounds good, and I hope everyone can check you guys out online. If you know someone, refer them. That's probably one of the key things as well. But really thanks for all your time and your insights today, Lottie. It's fantastic to have an in-depth conversation with you about your lived experience, and thank you for sharing so much. It's really important that we share these stories, and hopefully we can encourage more to do so, because that's how we move forward. But thank you very much, Lottie, for your time and for coming on the lived experience. Thank you so much, Joel. It's awesome.